what we have here on the panel is a great combination. I mean, it's what I call strategic network. We have one who represents the multinational company, an American perspective, having been with the multinational company, who has cut across the political side as well as the business side. And we have the other person. In fact, when someone introduced Scott to me, he said, well, Rolls-Royce is really making waves, not because of its helicopter, but it is because of the guy who is running the division. So that's how Scott was introduced to me. And Rajiv is, I mean, he's a quintessential entrepreneur. I mean, I have seen him follow his track for about 99, so about 7 years now. So he got the award for being one of the innovative manager within Lilly, Chairman's Ovation Award, and very, very thoughtful person. In fact, I really admire him, and I'm glad that he has joined us in this panel. And Deloris brings a very macro perspective. I mean, economists are great at that, and in fact, we have all been struggling. In fact, we are looking at the forum messages. Hey, is Friedman wrong? Is Friedman right? Where should we? What should we do? Where should we go? I mean, the discussion has been great, and here is our own economist to fill in the dots for us. Okay? So now the session is yours, and who would like to go first? Greg.
So my name is Greg Tamer. Work for a French company, Thompson Incorporated. Quality Process Office manager there. The fact that it is a French-owned company, about 3 or 4 years ago, this question is for Scott. 3 or 4 years ago, our boss came into us and told us that we were opening up a design center in India, in Bangalore. And it was met with a lot more than just skepticism. And he was promoting that we elevate ourselves instead of writing code. We are to become the process managers or the the system architects type thing. He wanted to, and to a lot of us, there was a great deal of angst, and he wanted those people, the Indians, to come here, and we would teach them, and of course everybody was saying, we're teaching them to take our jobs away from us. Our boss said, now that I've read Friedman, I understand that, I'd say he read the book 3 years ago, but 3 years ago the book didn't exist. So the question for you is, you're in the military for 14 plus years. You've been, like, I guess, on the international scene all of your professional career. But were there instances where you felt that angst about? I guess the military's not going to outsource their jobs, but still, even with
you'd be surprised.
When you started working with GE and then you went to Rolls-Royce, either the personal anxiety you felt associated with this when you came up against the international market, or the resistance you felt in the company and the people you worked with, how did that evolve? How did you resolve that issue, or convince or educate those people, or so it's a big question. But.
No, it's really a good one, because there is a dynamic tension when you do things differently. And when you go from an international to a global company, you do things differently. And so with that change, there's uncertainty, and with uncertainty, there's fear. So what you have to do is you have to have a vision, you have to have a strategy, and you have to communicate those strategies and say, we're going to do this because. And you got to make sure that because is clearly articulated. Like saying, going to a place where you can get code written more cost effectively. Well, you still have to be an intelligent customer, and I think that's one of my fears. As I look at some of the changes going on, we might not maintain that ability to be a smart customer. We might continue to outsource farther up that food chain, to where again we might really kind of lost track of what it is that happens down in the mechanics in the lower levels. And so as we build our international strategy and global, you have to again still think, we still have to know how the mechanics work of the underpinnings. And so you have to look at the value proposition. Where do you add value in your value stream as a supplier of goods and services? And as part of your proposition as being globally competitive, you're going to have to restructure your team continuously so you maintain that competitive position. And so does that mean people transfer their skill sets from what they're doing one day to another year? Absolutely. You have to be flexible because the market's going to mandate it. And so I could clearly understand going into a place like Bangalore, where again, there are a lot of multinational corporations there that are sucking up a lot of those engineers and scientists and IT specialists and putting them to work as part of their overall strategy and structure, maybe to either meet a strategic objective of something they want to do in India to establish a market presence, or it might be to, again, drive some cost equation within their own corporation. So you really, I think the most important thing as you go through changes in your companies, you just have to communicate why you're doing it. Because whether it's Wall Street or whether it's the city in London, they don't like surprises. And so you have to communicate effectively to them why you do strategic moves like a major offshoring or some sort of international partnership. So, no, it's not easy because, again, it usually means some people will change what they're doing. I hope that helps.
Rajiv and Deloris, if you want to add some comments, you're welcome to.
The only thing I would add to that is to follow up a little bit on the don't lose the nuts and bolts. I think that in the professional services area, the outsourcing by law firms, the outsourcing by some of the accounting firms, I worry sometimes that those nuts and bolts get lost. The best people at the senior level are the people who understand how to do the junior level things. Take a tax return, for example. The very best tax return advisors are people who know how those returns are put together and know how to do it in a way that's legal and that is aggressive and gets the company the best answer. So some of the outsourcing, I worry a little bit about whether or not this is long-term wise to do, because you worry about whether or not the senior level people here are going to be the senior level people 10 years, 15 years from now because of the way the job's been split. But that remains to be seen.
Rajiv?
When I was listening to Scott, and I was actually only nodding my head because I agreed with everything you said. And I think one of the things, if I may add to, in response to what you said, which is linked to what Scott said, if it sometimes happens, this is reality, that you are in a company and you see that in this industry, every company is outsourcing. So you say, we must also do it. Anything that is done without a strategy or a thought obviously can have problems, no questions about it. So an analysis of what is it that we must do here and what is it that we can outsource to India, that analysis always helps. And of course, articulating that is the key. And this angst, this concern is human nature, it is understandable, but you can mitigate only by communicating the overall grand strategy. And I think if the strategy is there, that can take care of some of the concerns that you are raising too, because then you do it in a more planned manner.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mike? Sorry, Mara, go ahead.
My name is Mark Bill. I'm from St. Francis Hospital here in Minneapolis. And I have a question for Dr. Wright and Mr. Gulati. With specific to emerging markets, for instance, in the large population.
Not speaker, please.
With specific to emerging markets in India or what have you, with large population growth, that's likely going to hold down real wage growth to some extent. Okay, that being said, for a company like Lilly, who a lot of their drugs might be considered that, which is not really that, some of them are life necessity drugs, but some of them are more quality of life drugs. What are the difficulties with that for markets? You have this whole thing of like luxury products or services going into those markets, and a lot of Lilly's market went into determine that in that country, but not in the U.S. So what are the barriers for that?
In fact, there is something which is very specific to pharmaceutical industry, and that's the biggest challenge for multinationals working in India, and that has been the lack of protection of intellectual property. I'm not going in the direction you wanted me to, but the reality is this is the biggest challenge, and this is a challenge I faced as long as I was there. From 1970 till 2005, there were no product patents for pharmaceuticals in India at all, which means it was perfectly fine and legal for an Indian pharmaceutical company to copy a patented product of a multinational. And if you have invested nothing in research, and it's only that you are manufacturing, you don't have to allocate $1 billion over what you sell. That's what it costs to discover a new molecule nowadays. So that was a huge challenge. You went in and you had a very well-developed, strong local industry with no research cost, and just taking the best molecules of every multinational in the world and copying that and selling it in India at the lowest prices possible. That is a bit of a challenge I can share with you. And it's a long debate on how do you manage and what do you do. But the fact is that India also realized that they need to move up the value chain, so they have reintroduced product patents starting from January of 2005. And what that will do to India is that the Indian industry, which is so strong, incidentally, India is the largest exporter of generics in the world. India has the largest FDA of US approved manufacturing plant outside of US. And you know what their market is. Market is the United States. So what will happen now, hopefully, is that local industry, which is so strong in terms of chemistry and biology, it will eventually also start moving up the value chain towards intellectual property protection and discovery, because business goes wherever there is maximum money. So the challenges were different earlier, they're different now. I know I have not answered your question, but this is what's been happening there in the country.
And if I may just make one comment, and you help me with this because I don't remember the numbers for sure. One of the things you said was with the large population, wages are not going to go up that quickly. But in India, in the IT industry, wages went up last year double digit and this year double digit, if I remember correctly.
For the last 13 or 14 years, the salaries have been rising double digits.
Yeah.
In fact, you said it very well about this cost equalization. That is happening. And in fact, I did not talk about it later, but earlier when I was talking, I did say that this cost advantage is going to go away. In fact, it is going to go away much faster than manufacturing. Because manufacturing, it's difficult to uproot a plant to take it from one country to another. Services, it's the easiest thing to do. And the salaries have been rising, I would say, unnaturally so in India. That equalization is happening. In turn, that is creating a market for products. That's also what I mentioned, because the income is rising so fast.
Okay, my name is Gary Poole. I work for HNT. My name is Gary Poole. I work for HNTB Civil Engineering downtown. My question is, with the growing competition for energy and material throughout the world, is it really possible for the world to get flat when your larger countries, China, the United States, and other countries, are really going to feel pressured to secure this energy and resources, and that could stunt all the smaller players? That's for the economists.
I was hoping that if I looked dumb long enough, somebody else would think that I could answer it. Certainly. I mean, what's going to happen is the price of energy is going to rise, obviously. As the demand for it rises, the price is going to rise as well. There's going to be a trade-off. That we economists talk about something called the capital-labor ratio. And what that means is that as capital becomes more expensive relative to labor, you're going to start substituting labor for capital. That capital-labor ratio varies dramatically. It varies from country to country. So as energy is more expensive, as capital equipment becomes more expensive, people may be going to, or they will go to, more labor-intensive production processes. But your question really was, are we going to eliminate certain countries from this mass development because of the price of energy? I don't think so. My personal view, certainly it'll make it harder. Certainly the growth may be slower. Certainly the growth may be different because they may be doing those kinds of jobs that do not require heavy energy input. But I don't think it stops it.
I get to see the material side of that piece right now because engines are made out of some exotic stuff. Titanium, for example, is we're looking at double-digit increases in titanium price. A lot of that's driven by our own industry. The new Boeing 787 Dreamliner is going to use tons of titanium ore to build one airplane. And so you see our own industry, then you have the golfing industry that likes titanium. And then you get into some of the things that we need to make alloys with, rhenium, cobalt. Well, they found a use for rhenium in desalinization plants. And so in a place where really we were kind of the only industry that used rhenium in some of our alloys, now there's a different competitive source out there. So we're seeing 100% kinds of material price on materials. So again, it's a pretty ornery world out there when you got more and more people that are doing things with finite resources. Yeah, it's supply and demand.
Mike Horrocks.
Okay. I'm Mike Horrocks. I'm the Director of Client Services with Baker Hill up in Carmel. And my question is actually for Deloris. And I want to preface this with, first of all, I'm very pro free trade. I have my own copy of GATT and my own copy of NAFTA. My wife hates it. They sit on my bookshelf. But I'm really pro free trade. But as you know, you mentioned this equilibrium, and we've already mentioned it a little bit with the panel. And I'm having a hard time as I'm drawing some charts here. I can see the benefit for my generation. I'm thinking a little bit further out, like with my sons, for example. As those equilibriums happen, the costs of the services we've already talked about in India are going to get to that point. Quality of life issues start to come into play. I mean, what's your perspective, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, on the quality of life aspects within the U.S., and what can we maybe do to address that to where, we could enjoy a quality of life that we have today?
Yeah. And I'm a glass is half full kind of person. And so I think, frankly, the real cost of globalization is being borne today by people who are high school educated and less, who had been working in manufacturing jobs that were low skill or no skill. Those are the jobs that are moving out of this country very rapidly. Those people have very little opportunity to retrain. I think 50-year-old guys, there's not enough time left in their lives to retrain and go into something else. So I think the biggest costs are being borne today by that class that's being displaced. I said I'm a glass half full person because I think at some point we're going to wake up as a country and we're going to start saying to ourselves, why is it that our universities are training scientists, engineers, various other kinds of technical people all over the world, but non-U.S. citizens tend to be at the top of the class? Why is that happening? I was saying earlier that the majority of the really, really top people that we talk to are U.S. trained, but they're not U.S. citizens. Something's wrong in our educational system. And my personal view is that as soon as we wake up to that and as soon as we fix it, then we're going to be ideally situated to compete at 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now. And the world's going to look different than it does today. Your sons are probably going to be doing work very different from the kind of work that you did, at least in some sense. But I don't think that the end is near. I think that this is something we can adapt to and be successful at.
Can I have a follow-up?
No.
Yeah, I just kind of, I'm thinking like Bill Murray from Stripes. We're Americans. You're assuming that innovation's dead. We're still the innovators on the planet. And so we're going to continue to change what we do. We're just not going to stop. We've been kicked out of every decent country on earth. No. So again, you have to assume I'm a half full glass kind of guy myself. So again, I still look at what goes on in this planet and where a lot of the innovation comes from. It still comes from the United States. And so I'm not going to suppose that that innovation, whatever it is that drives us to do the things that we do, is going to change. We'll keep continuing to push.
Rajiv, you want to say something?
No, I think part of it, I was trying to say what Scott's saying, if you remember my slide, the Boeing or the Microsoft, to assume that, or the pharmaceutical industry, almost all the new product patents come only from the United States. Now, in other countries, especially in Europe, the environment has been created that it's not profitable to do it there and it's profitable to do it here. So I'm with Deloris. As long as free trade is there, there will be innovation and there will be ways and means found to keep that leadership, because there's a huge advantage of the size and the wealth of the country. It's a one single large market which is very difficult to find anywhere else on the planet. Now, forecast is that China will be the largest economy and US second and India third largest. Relatively, the standard of living in those countries will improve significantly. I cannot imagine it's going down in the US.
My name is Michael Paxton. I'm a JD MBA student. I'm also a software specialist for the Indiana State Police. My question is principally aimed at, or directed to Scott, but intellectual property management, the challenges of intellectual property management mentioned quite a bit in all the contexts. And I'm interested in what you would consider some specific strategies and tactics, pitfalls to watch out for, things to be concerned about when attempting to manage intellectual property in a globalized context.
You have to have a strategy to do it. It doesn't happen by accident. You have to set your strategy to go after patents. You have to set your strategy to make things competition sensitive. You have to, it's got to be core to what you do. And then what you got to do, when you make offshoring decisions, are you putting some things at risk? And whatever you're offshoring, are you willing to make that risk? Sometimes the U.S. government kind of makes that decision for you. No, you will not offshore high temperature alloys that go into turbine airfoils. Nor will they let you do algorithms that go into your electronic controls. So what you have to do, if you think you're going into you're going to expose yourself to IP infringement, you got to do that consciously. And then what you do is you have the right commercial terms with whoever you're doing business with, to where you're not going to make it worth their while if they do that to you. And so you got to have a strategy, you got to have commercial terms and conditions, and you have to have then an audit capability to make sure that whoever you're doing business with is being compliant with the guidelines that you've set forth. And then you mitigate your risk. And some things you just say, these are crown jewels. They aren't going outside of the four walls of whatever facility you want to keep them in.
Hi, my name is Jose Samperio. I work for Cummins in global distribution. And actually, this is the other side of my questions. He was worried about his sons. I was worried about the middle class, middle-aged, 40-year, 50-year-old guys that they don't have the energy, the time, or the money to reskill themselves, and it's too late for them. So how do we cope with that as a society, that with the fact that we're going to leave them behind because they're not running fast enough, and we're going to have to wait 10, 15 years to educate our child to build those PhD capabilities. So how do we cope with that, that some people are going to have to be left behind?
That's right.
Okay, I'll take that one. In most corporations, there are retraining opportunities. There's education opportunities. And what we try to do again is we try to, when there are situations where there's going to be a redundancy or a layoff, we look at what's available in the community, and a lot of times, and again, that's part of being here in Indianapolis, we work very closely with the community to find, are there other opportunities for placement? Where are the markets that need that have shortfalls in skill sets, can we provide training so that we can repatriate them into a different position? And so what we try to do is provide the opportunities. We can't force the individual to do anything. And so either they'll avail themselves of the opportunities that we afford them, or they won't.
So you're saying you feel as a corporation, we have the corporate responsibility for relocating or giving them the opportunity to relocate?
A lot of times what we'll do, one is we'll give them the opportunity to be competitive. And we got to look at what their labor practices are that are keeping them from being competitive. Either it's their work practices or something that, you know, even, I'll give, again, this is non-attribution, look at healthcare costs. Right now at our company, our represented laborers don't pay a whole lot for healthcare. In the last negotiation, they're just now paying copay. And that's the represented labor. The salary guys, it's a whole different story. And so again, we try to work with them to say, this impacts cost structure, which impacts our ability to be competitive. If we're not competitive, your job's not going to exist. So there's lots of different things you do with your labor force well before it happens to be a redundancy and you're gone. So one, we try to give opportunities to be competitive because we are in a very competitive environment. You know, we got General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, Turbomeca. I mean, it's a very competitive market. So we try to work to make us competitive. If that's not the case and we make a decision we're going to do something elsewhere, then we provide retraining opportunities and then we provide outplacement. So yes, we do recognize our responsibilities to our labor force.
Hi, I'm Heidi Bradley with Eli Lilly and Company, and my question's for Rajiv. On one of your slides, you had the political grade for India at a D. Without knowing much about how the politics in India work, can you give us a little bit of background on that and what you see changing in the future that'll change international business and what we can look forward to?
It's very difficult to give a short answer to this question. Let me try. The question is very, very relevant because in India, politics used to dictate economy. The biggest change that has happened in the last 10 years is that it is no longer so. Economy is supreme. India used to have one-party rule and then two-party rules, one after another ruling the country, and they had different economic philosophies. But because of what happened in 1991, that was a watershed year, India was almost bankrupt. $100 million of foreign exchange reserves, not enough to pay even for 3 weeks of imports. Income tax rate which went as high as 96%. It is unbelievable scenario. You cannot imagine. Tariff barriers, 200% import duties. And what people realized, and you know the rest of the story, I hope, that Congress party came into power unexpectedly. They didn't expect to be there. An old person who was about to retire became prime minister. He had nothing to lose with bold experiments. He caught hold of a PhD in economics from Oxford University who was looking for a job as a professor, had just come back from World Bank, had never been in politics in his life. He called him and says, you are from today the finance minister of the country, which is the second most powerful job. Today that person is the prime minister of India. And first thing he did, no licensing, produce whatever you want to produce. Earlier I told you that you have to take permission from government. 25,000 cars, you cannot make 25,001 cars. Today India produces 1 million cars a year. So total change, no licensing, import tariffs are now down to something like 15%, income tax maximum is down to 30%, and they changed everything. The lower the taxes went, higher the tax collection became. And that's a lesson nobody can miss. GDP from 2% moved to 6 to 8%. That's a lesson nobody can miss. India has been ruled by coalition parties for the last several years. Today, the ruling party has 23 different parties. They are jointly ruling. But the lesson of economics is that no party has the courage to change the direction of the economic growth. So there's absolutely nothing to worry. Whosoever wins the election or loses the election, everybody is unanimous that the direction of reforms and the economic growth is going to continue forever. Now this is understood by all political parties, because in last 10 years we have 3 different shades of political parties ruling the country. But when they're in opposition, they oppose everything. When they're ruling, they do exactly the same thing, which needs to be done.
This question is for Scott, and maybe a follow-up from Deloris. My name is Andrew Mendoza. I work for OpCap, this is for Scott, you mentioned earlier about labor unions and how at your company you just recently got them to start paying co-pays for medical. And earlier in your speech you talked about the history in the UK about their labor unions as well. Where do you see, or I guess, what do you see as the impact of labor unions on, or going forward with the expansion into India, expansion into China? Do those countries have labor unions? What do you see the role of labor unions in this country being when we can get so much cheaper labor abroad?
It's not, and I'm not anti-represented labor at all. It's, again, they've got to be pragmatic about what their behaviors do to the overall company. If you look in the United States, a lot of that migration from the Rust Belt to the South was right to work. Again, and also the government incentives to do business there weren't all too shabby either. So I think, again, it's not, you got to, as companies develop and evolve in competitive global market, there's pieces to it. And like right now, Rolls-Royce assembly, inspection, and test are absolutely one of our hallmarks at what we do here in Indianapolis. Commodity manufacturer, that's a toss of the coin. We are good at specific types of components that we're going to want to do forever because, again, they're the fraction of critical kinds of things, the safety. And so as you work with your representative labor force, you're going to want to have them as part of your team, recognizing what your demands are in the global environment, what your cost pressures are, what are your competitors doing. So that, again, if we're not in business, they don't have a job. And the only way we can be in business is to be competitive. And so it's got to be a partnership with your labor force in terms of moving forward. And again, you've got to have frank, open communications and say, you know what, we lost this competition because we were priced here, GE was priced there. And oh, by the way, they were able to bring an industrial offset program to this country by doing this kind of manufacture. And so those are the kinds of discussions that you do have as you move forward. The India Shen program is a real good example. One of the requirements for that program is licensed manufacture. So the first 60 engines will be built here in Indianapolis for that program. Then we will make kits, which will be assembled then in India, with a migration where they will start then manufacturing piece parts, building their own kits, and then assembling engines. But we communicated that to the union and said, this is the game we're in for this competition. And so again, you have to have those open communications so they understand what the rules of the game are.
And I agree with what Scott said, but I want to take the conversation just slightly differently. I tend to be a free market economist. I tend to think that markets work and that at the end of the day, a free and open market that's responding to demand and supply is going to be best for everybody. Labor, management, consumers, everybody. So I think that what the answer you just heard was the practical answer, in the sense that labor unions are part of this economy. They're not going to go away. And so what we have to do is to find a way to work with them effectively and efficiently to do all of the things that you just heard. From the theoretical standpoint, I wish we didn't have them. because I think they're a restraint or a constraint on the way business operates. I think back when labor unions came about, they were necessary. I think they served a very good purpose in the early years. I don't think they're as necessary today, and I think what they do is to slow down the movement toward efficiency and productivity that we could have in their absence.
Can I corroborate what you said by Indian example? When Lilly started in India, that was a big concern because India used to be highly unionized. There was a union, All India Union of Medical Representatives, All India Union of all companies, All India Union of Retailers, All India Union of Wholesalers. In fact, the only union that did not exist was of manufacturers. And today, and it was necessary, I guess, because when the economy is growing at 2% and there is high inflation, you don't want to lose your job, and unions protected the jobs, and it was impossible to fire somebody. Today, there's no relevance of union because there's so many jobs, there's so many opportunities, you would pay anything to retain an employee. If the salaries are rising 15-16% in your company and you can get double in a different company, you don't want anybody to protect your job. You have enough opportunities in the economy. So free trade economy, in fact, because it's nascent and it's growing, has the result that the unions are almost irrelevant in that context today.
My name is Mike Henderson and I work at Eli Lilly. My question is really to each of you, and that is, what can we be doing specifically as a society or as a larger society to ensure that we're being more competitive? For example, Scott, you indicated that a lot of the rules that we have to follow, a lot of other companies are not, or countries are not following. What can we do to compete in that environment? Deloris, you indicated education. What are some specific things that we can do about education? And of course, India, how can we partner better with India and countries like India, China, etc., to ensure that we're being competitive in this market?
Well, again, in terms of taking advantage of what's available to us, again, what we've got to do is always be pushing the bounds. I'm a big one for innovation, and you have to be questioning, what could be done differently, what could be done more efficiently, what could be done more effectively, what are the tools that will enable you to do that. So, there's still a real place in our country for the academic and industrial relationship, because you get the minds together with the innovations, with the tools that can create that initial spark of something. I'm very optimistic about our ability to keep pushing the bounds. Who do you think will develop the alternative to fossil fuels? I'm convinced it will come out of this country. It'll come out of necessity. It won't be easy, but I'm convinced there will be the drive. It will click, and we'll go do it. And so, as I look at our competitiveness, what are the world problems, and what are we doing about it? What did we do in agriculture? We did wonderful things in agriculture that helped the world. So again, I think there's got to be that national focus and objective to be on that leading edge, and then look at the skill sets that are going to be required to do that. Because again, who would have thought when I started school, computers were still Fortran and COBOL, big decks of cards and stuff. Nobody wanted to go into that stuff. That wasn't going to be fun. Boy, did they miss an opportunity if they had. So the skill sets are you got to be sensitive. What's the world changing? What are the skill sets needed? And then you got to have the education system that gives them the tools and the background to be able to put it to effective use. So that's.
I will subject you on the education front to what I bore my friends with on frequent occasions. If you look at elementary and high school teachers, What are they paid today? Almost nothing. What are they worth to us? An awful lot. And why are we in the situation we're in today in our elementary and high school education system? In my view, it's women's liberation that caused it. Women's liberation allowed women like me to choose to be economists in a consulting firm, making orders of magnitude more money than I would have made if I were forced to be a teacher or a nurse, which is what my mother's generation and some of my generation had to do. So we gave our best and brightest women opportunities outside of nursing and teaching, but we did not respond to that by paying teachers something akin to what they're worth. And my personal view is we've got to change that. We as a society have got to start valuing the education of our children, attract the best and the brightest again. When I was in school, many of the teachers I had were women, and they were incredibly bright. They weren't paid anything because they didn't have any alternatives. But today, we don't have that situation. So it's a little bit of a radical thought, perhaps, but I think that's the solution to the education problem we have.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you want me to answer the third? what to do and how to be competitive? Before I answer, just 2 sentences on what India is thinking, because I know you're worried about what's happening in the US and Indians are worrying what's happening in India. When the patent bill was passed in 2005, there was a big debate, and everybody in India was worried that if there are product patents, Indian companies will not be allowed to copy. The prices of medicines will become very high, as much as they are in the US. The common man will not get medicines, and a lot of pharmaceutical companies in India will have to close down. So I'm just painting this picture to share with you that they are worried too about the changes which are happening and as the economy globalizes. None of the 2 worries are justified at all, because what's emerging is a wonderful collaboration and cooperation. In fact, I recall I first time came to the US in 1996. I was working in the area of business development, and statistics those days were there were 1,200 biotech companies conducting only research in the world, and more than 80% were in the United States. Half in Massachusetts and half in California. And that's what I used to do, travel to each of these places every month. And that's the model which is emerging today in India. None of those biotech companies then, and none of those companies in India today, have the capacity to develop a molecule spending $1 billion. In fact, majority of them don't even have an annual revenue of $1 billion. To develop that molecule and globalize and market it all over the world. And neither the biotech companies in the US could do that. And most of the large companies like GSK, Pfizer, Eli Lilly, today probably have more than half their revenue coming from products which are licensed in. Well, it can happen in the US, it can happen in India. So what is emerging is discovery, basic, early research in India, which is much cheaper to do there, and they make a lot of money doing that contract work for the US companies. Molecule back to the US companies, developing globally and marketing globally. And in this industry, the biggest value and the only value is intellectual property, which is controlled here. So I think this will make the whole industry much more productive, reduce the research costs, have more innovation happening and the value captured here. I think it's good for both the countries. At least that's the way I see it, and that's why I'm here, in fact.
John Simmons, I know we're getting real late here, so I'll try to keep this really brief, but I just want to follow up with the education question. I know those of us who pretty much read Friedman's book cover to cover, he talks a lot about in there about the loss of science and engineering capability in the U.S. Obviously, Lilly and Rolls-Royce are heavy into R&D. Do you guys see a more proactive reach into our public schools particularly to pull these kids that are losing focus on this as early as 6th grade? I've seen it with my own eyes where kids who are great in up to middle school, they lose it, they go off into ESPN land or MTV land, and you don't see them again. And if you don't get them that early, they're gone. What do you guys see as initiatives that the corporate world can enact so that we don't lose these kids and that they're going to be your employees in the future?
We've got a lot of programs where we outreach, again, with mentors and stuff, even early in the elementary schools. But in the high schools, what we try to do is we have the first robotics that Rolls-Royce is actively engaged to get kids interested in engineering type stuff. And so there are a lot of neat outreach programs to get kids very subtly interested in science and mathematics and engineering through projects of building a robot that can go drop a basketball and do different stuff. So there's international competitions with that stuff. The Aerospace Industries Association hosts a rocketry contest nationally. And again, so there's lots of these high school club kind of activities. And some of us even push down now into the junior high, where again, they're kind of like junior associates with the high school teams. And so we're trying to think of clever ways that could spark interest other than, do you want to have a pocket protector and a Texas Instruments in your pocket? So it's a little bit different attack at how to get kids interested in fun stuff.
Rahul Rishad. My question is for Rajiv. While it's difficult to argue against the growth and prosperity that we're seeing in India, we've seen, as you've probably mentioned, that the growth is a result of the development that we've seen in the last 10, 15 years. It's very quick and sudden. It also means that it could be unstable. So it could be on thin ice. There are reasons to be a bit despondent or concerned. India is still a place where you have a lot of illiteracy and a lot of poverty. All the wealth that is flowing is although the middle class, as you pointed out, is growing, it is still concentrated, the wealth that's flowing into that country. The divide between the rich and poor is growing. So what is it that would prevent a politician to appeal to the 70% or 80% of the poor to run on an extreme platform and win elections and reverse all the gains that we've seen?
Your concern is very, very real, and it's coming up more and more in a big way. Because the growth has been with the service industry, the benefit has gone to graduates. And majority of Indian population is not graduate. And you are right, even today 40% population is illiterate. So the divide has increased, and divide is increasing further. The way the Indian politicians are looking at it, at least those who understand the economics, are trying to emulate China. And that's why I mentioned that both countries are trying to change. In China, because of manufacturing, more jobs have been created with unskilled and less educated people. And that's what the government wanted. In India, because of service industry and private industry, it has been created more with people who are educated and who are already middle class. So India, therefore, is focusing a lot on infrastructure and on manufacturing. And the good news is that manufacturing, all of a sudden, in the last couple of years, has shown double-digit growth, which has never happened before. So the concern is correct. The issue is understood, and hopefully something is being done. Of course, when I talk about it, I make it sound very simple. But to implement it is real tough, and the danger of what you say is there. But because there is a track record of last 14, 15 years, because there's a history of growth, reversing that will not be easy. So that's the main saving grace that the politicians, nobody has tried to reverse it. But very quickly you need to generate employment, and you need to take the benefits down to less skilled and less educated people. That's absolutely correct.